To Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 174 today. Happy New Year, even though it is the end of January, even though it is the beginning of February now, but Happy New Year, everyone. And yeah, first show of the new year. And I just want to welcome my first guest of the year, Stanislav. How are you doing today, Stanislav?
Good.
How's your day been? How's it going there in Russia at the moment? I heard you guys are having a bit of a, journey with snow.
We always do. It's not. Yeah, every big snowstorm from the media is a snowmageddon. They follow the American playbook on media hype. So it's about a meter of snow. Nothing too bad.
I mean, it's still cool to have that amount of snow, especially being able to see a lot of the beautiful, architect in Russia, like in Moscow and all of that stuff, What would you like? What would you say makes your favorite place to go to Russia in the winter? Like your favorite place in Russia to go during the winter?
Where I don't have to shovel snow. Snow loses a lot of its appeal when you start shoveling it on a daily basis. It becomes a lot less appealing and a lot less interesting. It just becomes a pain. So yeah, I wind up doing quite a bit of shoveling snow, so I get my winter aerobics. It's got its appeal when you're looking at it. On a landscape, and you see the fresh snow and the trees. It's got a lot of appeal. It loses, like I said, it loses that appeal when then you have to start cleaning the snow in your yard, and places like that. I prefer the summer or the spring. Actually, I prefer the spring when the trees just start blooming and you get that light green aura on the trees.
Oh, beautiful!
Which I'm hoping to see within the next 2 months. So we'll see if it's an early spring or not.
You'll see it soon. What would you say is your favorite place to go holiday in Russia, mate? The one that you love the most? Like really beautiful.
That's hard to say. There's a lot to go and see in Russia. Russia pretty much so has just about every biosphere you can ask for, except for jungle. It's got subtropical too in the south, particularly. Though this year, even the subtropical areas have gotten snowed, which is rare, but they do have it. And places like Crimea, Zaporozhye, Krasnodarsky Krai. I mean, those areas, Rostov, those areas are relatively warm. Most of their winters are snow free, maybe rain, things like that. And that area is really nice. Krasnodarsky Krai is very nice because you've got the beach, you've got forests, you've got rolling hills, you've got mountains in the south. You've got everything you want. Basically, you got all the bio zones in that area, and a lot of ancient history in that area, going back to the Scythians, the Greeks. Russians were in that area in the late 8th century, 9th century. Then the Turks came in, grabbed that, and then we grabbed that back about 500 years later from the Turks. So it's been on and off, but there's a lot of history in those areas. So that's always interesting. And lots of wine yards. There's wine yards that just go on and go on and go on for hectares upon hectares. So
that's nice. That's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, Russia produces a lot of wine. And in fact, something that most people don't know, at least until the EU decided to tariff itself into stupidity, which isn't hard. Stupid people doing stupid things. Yeah, Russia provided Europe with a lot more than just the oil and gas. That's all that everybody talks about. But Russia provided, Russia exported to Europe everything. I mean, wheat, rice, fish, pork, chicken, fertilizers, steel. I mean, Mercedes and BMW and these types of companies were buying automobile parts out of Russia. Aluminum and steel parts that they were then putting together into cars. Just as an example. I mean, it's just the list is huge. And one of the things that was being bought, the Italians were buying wine material, aka grapes, from Russia to make wine in Italy.
Wow, that's really interesting. I never knew that, man. Wow, you would think, because when everyone thinks of wine, you think France, 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 because France, of course, it's the home of wine, people like to think, or Italy. But wow, I never knew that about Russia, man. That's another thing I never knew about it.
Yeah, well, actually, historically, they're looking at Georgia being the home of wine, the
Oh,
first place
wow.
wine was made. I don't know if it's true or not. That's from about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. But then you get some of the ruins in Turkey that date back to 11,500 years ago, ruined city. So I'm sure they were probably making wine at that point too. It grows there too in the wild. So I don't know. But yeah, that's one of the locations. At least that's the Georgian claim to fame down there. So, but yeah, it was long before Italy and long before France or Germany. By the way, Germany makes decent wine. Western Germany and Southern Germany. So wine grows. Um, Wine grapevines. Let me rephrase that. Not wine. Grapevines grow in a lot of places. We grow grapes here in the Moscow region. It's not on any kind of huge estates. I mean, we've got some in our yard. Neighbors have grapes. They grow grapes even in Omsk, where the temperature regularly hits -40. They just bury the vines in autumn. Around October, they'll trim them down, bury them, and then when they have a very very short spring in western Siberia, short spring, short summer, short spring, short autumn, but a long summer that's in the upper 30s and up to 40 degrees, and it's a
Wow.
pretty good climate for grapes. So they grow like crazy during the summer, and yeah, they make wine in western Siberia.
So, Stanislav, so speaking of that, tell us about yourself, your background, your military experience. So tell us about yourself.
I was born in Lugansk. Back then it was Voroshelovgrad. Lugansk, and then immigrated. My parents immigrated to the U.S. Back in '79. So I wound up growing up in the U.S. and South. Um, for a more proper accent, I grew up in North Carolina. I spent a good chunk of my life. So that's more of a North Carolinian accent right there. I just happen to speak more flat English, Midwestern English when I do the shows and everything. So went to university in the U.S. Went into ROTC. Enlisted while I was still enlisted in the Guard while I was still in university, and then when I finished my degree, went active duty. So all in all, had 11 and a half. Oh, I'm sorry, 11 years of service. I was a captain promotable, so I turned down major's rank. It's captain, but then you do comma and you write promotable because you're ready to go to the next rank. So you could be a major promoter, what have you. Actually, it's written that way. Refused major's ranking and left the military, and I left it because in 1999. I was a staff officer in the 18th Airborne Corps in G3. And 18th Airborne Corps is 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, which is a helicopter division actually now since Vietnam, 10th Mountain and 3rd Mechanized. And there's a bunch of other battalions that you could almost put together another division. The Yeah, when you're at a company level or a battalion level or brigade level, you don't see a big picture. You don't really see it in a division level. You don't really see the big picture. You mostly see your next upcoming 6 months, 12 months out schedule. But at corps level, you start to see the big picture. And the big picture was in '99, in 2000. I left in 2004 when my contract was up and I had an opportunity to leave. In '99, while the politicians were having we're singing who ya, and Bush was looking into Putin's eyes and talking about his soul and we'll be friends and all that. in '99, the U.S. was still, except for the couple of months we were preparing for the invasion of Baghdad, and those plans are basically done as it is, because every major military staff in any country, they've got plenty of extra free time unless they're at war, so they just start making plans basically to have a war with everybody. There's a staff plan for a war with just about any country in the world. In the U.S., I'm sure in Russia does the same thing. They run these games, planning games, to keep their skills up. The U.S. even has plans for war with aliens and with zombies. It's just they just play it out to keep the staff thinking. But once something actually happens, you have a plan on the shelf, and you just have to realize that plan to modern standards. So it doesn't take that long. You're not starting from scratch. Well, besides that, the only thing we prepared for was war with Russia. And that wasn't something new. It was just it never stopped. Just till 1999, Russia was doing a very good job of collapsing, and everybody's just in the U.S. was just waiting for it to die off and then go rape and pillage and feast off the corpse. And then Vladimir showed up, and things went very askew for Western plans. Something just didn't stand up to the smell test, and Russia got back up on her legs, and things got a little more serious, because if you want to take her down, it's becoming harder and harder every year. So the U.S. got a little more active after that, a lot more active.
What else? Can you tell more about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, by 2006, when Putin did the München address, at that point, people really started getting worried in the West, because he's not playing our game, and he couldn't be. Russia. The historical symbols of Russia is not a bear, and the imperial eagle is something that we got from the Byzantines. The historical symbols of Russia, the two historical symbols of Russia, are Единорог, which is the unicorn, and Жар Птица, which is the firebird or phoenix. Because Russia always comes back. No matter what catastrophe, no matter what invasion, Russia always comes back. It always is reborn. And as Putin said, the only way you can explain Russia is under God. And that's the only way you can explain Russia. Because the many times our death has been announced prematurely, and all those that announced it wound up in the grave they dug for us. And that's just how it is. It's always been that way. Every time the country was pronounced dead and chopped up, and then up pops some people's army here, some national army there, out of nowhere, and crushes the invaders. And it's just been that way for we've been getting invaded by the West. Everybody's going, oh, Napoleon, Hitler. We've been getting invaded by the West as an allied forces of the West since 1012 A.D. by Stanislav Krapivnik, who was Prince of Krakow and his Holy Roman Empire allies. So this has been going on for well over 1,000 years, 1,014 years to be more exact. And before that, there were raids and various raids from the Swedes, from Teutonic Knights, and so on. It's just they weren't very large, and they weren't unified and allied. And then in 1012 A.D., Vladislav Krapivnik, that was the first big invasion instead of just a raid. So yeah, we've been fighting off the West for well over 1,000 years. We've gotten very, very good at it. The West doesn't seem to remember that. But, the point is the Russians don't war. In Orthodoxy, war is always a sin. There is no just war concept in Orthodoxy. St. Augustine is a shared saint between the Orthodox and the Catholics. because the church was unified when he became when he was sanctified. But his just war, that's not something the East ever accepted. War is always a sin. It's to be avoided when it can be avoided. However, it becomes a necessary sin if it has to be because it stops something bigger and more evil. The conflict in Ukraine falls right in that category. For 8 years, Russia was trying to negotiate Minsk One, Minsk Two. It was putting the brakes on the rebels to keep them from going further, trying to keep a unified Ukraine. And then we all learned about that whole concept from Merkel and Hollande when they ran to the media in 22 to tell them all about how they fooled Vladimir Putin, pulled them around by the nose. Well, they were preparing Ukraine, buying time, preparing Ukraine to fight a war with Russia. So that's their own words. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not somebody making up. It's their own words to the media, and they were very happy about themselves. Oh, they were very happy about themselves because back in 22, they were all expecting Russia to collapse any day now. Just okay, not the first 2 weeks, fine. How about in 2 months? Well, maybe 6 months. Okay, well, definitely by the end of 22, it's going to collapse. And they were letting a lot of secrets out of the bag because their pride was just bursting at what their portion of all of this was. And then the unthinkable happened. Russia just kept getting stronger. So what do we do now? Well, we lie about it. It's microchips out of washing machines and shovels, hypersonic shovels that are beating us. That's it. Or winter. The favorite in the West is usually winter. General Winter beat us, not the Russian army. Well, no, it was the Russian army. It just continues on. It's been a continuation for the last 1,000 years of this kind of crap.
What would you say, Stanislav, was what got you into military stuff as a kid? Like what military book did you enjoy reading the most out of? And what moment, who is your favorite? What was your favorite war to study about out of any war?
Well, what got me in the military, actually, I wasn't, I was 18. Was I 18 at that point? Yeah, I guess I was 18 already at that point. I was finishing high school. I was applying to universities, and I wasn't planning on going in the military at all. I had the papers for West Point, but my chance of getting to West Point were pretty close to zero. Because for West Point, you have to have a federal senator from your state that backs you, and being Russian, and there's still a lot of anti-Russian biases that were in the U.S. There still is in the U.S. as there is, and there was in the U.S. military while I was serving. So my chances were pretty close to zero. But there were different military academies. I'm looking at all this like I don't need this crap. But I come from a military family, so I guess it's in the blood. My mother's family were what's called служебный люд, the service people, which was it's a very old, more like almost medieval term for the nobility, because they served in the military. Their first and main goal, main career was serving in the military, and then governing whatever land they were given. Russia really wasn't feudal. Feudalism in Russia died under Ion Vasilievich III the Great, the grandfather of Ion Grozny. The feared, not the terrible. Terrible is British propaganda, mistranslation. But so they were, my family traces, my mother's family anyways, from my mother's family's line, they trace back down to, they were serving under Ion Grozny, so mid-1500s. And my grandfather from my mother's side was old German aristocracy. So they were military on both sides. And my father's family were enlisted military for several generations. So I guess it was in the blood. Actually, one of my favorite books when I was a kid, it wasn't a military book. I skipped. First of all, I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, but I read a lot of adult fantasy and sci-fi. I mean, I skipped the teenage thing. I didn't like reading until I was about 12, 13, somewhere there, and I started reading a lot. But as far as books, more serious books. The one of the first books I guess at 12, I was a strange kid. At 12, I was reading La Prince, Machiavelli, and books like that. That was politics. Always interested me a lot. So as far as wars, I don't have any one particular war that's a favorite. I guess I got more books on. I've got a pretty extensive library. There's more bookshelves behind me than just what's on the video. I got a pretty extensive collection on World War II, just because that's the most. That's the war everybody based their military strategy and tactics off of for the last 80 years. But with drones, things have changed quite a bit, and smart munitions and so on. Hovering smart munitions. To say that there's any one particular war, no, I read them all because there's something to learn from everything. Human nature and human history repeats itself. It's the Marxists and the American Trotskyites, aka neocons, neolibs. Which basically all the same root. Not basically, it is all the same root. Trotskyitism. They believe in this continuous, direct, rolling march toward an enlightened future. Their version of it. You take Marxism out and you put democracy in. It's the same thing. At the end of the day, but human nature, by its very nature, human nature is cyclical. It's not. It doesn't go in direct line. Now the cycle can shift to the left or to the right somewhat, but it's still cyclical. Today's wave of republics. That's not the first time most governments were republics, and all republics died. They all die within. I think the maximum average republic will survive is about 200, 250 years, and many won't make it even close to that. Human nature. And then there will be dictatorship, or in the end, it becomes a monarchy again. All governments become monarchies. And eventually, maybe those monarchies will fall. Some will, some won't. And then they'll be replaced again with maybe some form of republic, and that'll fall again. And that's just human cyclical nature. It goes on and goes on and goes on. Human beings, on the average, they don't like to think of it as they have normalcy fallacy, or normalcy bias. Let me phrase that. Today, yesterday, the day before, today will be the same. Tomorrow will also be the same. That's what the human mind likes. It likes stability and sameness. When you start talking revolutions, when you start talking radical changes, the human mind is not very flexible for most people. This is, by the way, why a lot of people die from natural disasters. They psychologically can't accept radical change. They'll give up. Oh my God, the internet's off, no more Instagram. Oh, and there's no heating in the house, and all this, and they'll just go, oh. This is why when you have terrorist attacks, you have natural disasters, tsunamis, people just freeze. Their brains can't process it. They don't know what to do. They just freeze and they stand there. There's a good chunk of humanity that dies off that way every time. Like it or not, that's how it is. And just rid it big. And you see it in politics. People cannot accept it. They will cling on to whatever illusion of the past that was safe for them that they can, until the very last moment where they just physically can't do it anymore because it all crashes around them. That's humanity. So if you study history properly, the way history is taught in schools and in Russia too, in this case, and in universities, is a disservice, because it's mostly taught as names and dates. It's boring. It's just names and dates. It's whatever. When you teach it as cycles and waves, and you teach it, it's not just a name and date. Okay, there was a battle at this day. Why was there a battle at this day? What drove up to that battle? Or to that situation, and you start noticing the historical cycles as they go through. That becomes very interesting, well, at least for me, anyways. But judging by my own standards, that becomes very interesting. So there isn't any one particular. Everything works in cycles, and everything's interesting. You can always learn something from anything. There's an old military saying, you do you do a debrief after every training event and every operation, and if you fail but you learn something from that failure, it's not a failure; it's a teaching moment.
That is true. That is correct. Stanislav, I was just wondering, that was very good what you just told right there. I was just wondering, with the Ukraine-Russia war, with how it's going so far, how close do you think we are to seeing that war end? Do you think it's going to enter into a NATO-Russia conflict, or do you think it's at its end game? And what are Russia's, in your opinion, their real end game, goals for the war?
Well, wars, to begin with, it's very easy to start a war. Look at the Americans; they've started plenty. It's very difficult to end a war, because a war takes on a life of its own, as a lot of people like to say that. But as a war expands and extends, it has its own psychology. It has its own narrow band of choices, particularly for weak politicians who bend to those choices. And here's, by the way, a little concept that most people don't particularly view and understand. In the Middle Ages, war was a proprietary thing of kings, and it wasn't an ideological war. Well, there were some religious wars, obviously, the Crusades in part, but the vast majority of wars were not ideologically driven. They were driven over property or boundary lines. And if you're going to take somebody's province, what's the number one resource in that province? People. You don't want to kill the people. It's not very effective. You may raid and you may pillage if you're not planning on taking, just to drive down the resource capabilities of your enemies, or to drive away their attention to somewhere else. But if you're trying to take land, you don't want to kill the people. That's your number one resource. So wars were expensive, and they were limited in scope, and they weren't really ideologically driven. And as you more democratized, wars became much worse. They became ideologically driven. And this is a portion of being, quote, a republic. Republics are much more keen to being radical, insanely radicalized, ideologicalized states. Even Hitler, as a dictator, was still a republican form of government. And by the way, Hitler was no nationalist. I love these nationalists. Oh, he was a nationalist. No, he wasn't. He was a globalist, for God's sakes. Look what he was building. Hitler wasn't building the Kaiserreich. Hitler was building, that was the Kaiser. Hitler was building the new European order, which was the EU 1.0, version 1.0. And he flat out said that. It was obvious. And he flat out said that they were building the new European order of, quote, civilized states, where they were all going to be unified under one order. And Germany was going to be the premier economy of this unified European order. This is not a nationalist. This is a globalist, and a very liberal globalist, by the way. The difference was that Hitler's liberalism, he was ahead of his time. Instead of just doing class warfare, which the brown shirts were doing, and that they had to be got rid of once the aristocracy, the rich, or the oligarchy in Germany went on Hitler's side. So they had the Night of Long Knives, and the brown shirts were crushed by the black shirts, the Gestapo. Hitler was using race as the driving force, which is, by the way, all the liberals are now using race. It's all race-based politics. Hitler was just ahead of his time at that point. He was no nationalist. But as these countries republicanized, the wars become much, much worse. They become ideologically driven, where it's not a matter of taking the territory of your opponent for your own personal gain or your country's gain. It's, we have to exterminate them because they're the other evil. They're the others. They're the others. We have to kill them all. That becomes a mentality. And you see that radicalization that started toward the end of World War I and went overboard into World War II, and it still hasn't died down. It's actual clash not just of civilizations, but of radicalism, of extermination of civilizations. We can't live with the other. We have to destroy the other. We have to kill his kids because his kids are just as guilty as everybody else because it's the other. And that becomes a mentality, the big racism that grew up in that since then. And that it's also linked to as countries became more republicanized. And that's just, and by the way, in elections, if you look at republics, the president's not the father of the country. He's not a great unifier. He's anything but. He is the representative of that percentage of the population that voted for him and won. And everybody else is the other inside that country. That's one of the reasons why all republics die, because they just continue to harden different positions, political positions, with no real unification. And it can't be a unifier. By its very nature, it's a divider. That's what elections are. Yeah, we'll all come together and we'll all be unified again after elections. It's a fairy tale. It's an American. The Americans tell that fairy tale to themselves. I don't think they believe in it. It's gotten so blatantly obvious that you have to be absolutely blind to believe in that. But that's what that's all the fairy tales all republics tell, and that's the fairy tale under which all republics die. So, it's where is this going to go? And the reason I'm saying this, it's a roundabout way of saying this, but what I'm going to is when Russia started this conflict, the Russian end goal in this conflict was a neutral Ukraine. Yes, it recognized the Donbass as individual republics. And it did this because Ukraine bombed these people for 8 years nonstop. Ukraine, under Hollanday, thanks to Hollanday and Merkel, had armed itself up. It was the biggest NATO army in the world, in Europe. Not being NATO officially, but it was a NATO army. NATO trained, NATO equipped, NATO guided. As we learned later, NATO planned and guided by American and British generals. As I was saying that back in 23. And then the New York Times was nice enough in December of 24 to just to confirm everything I was saying. Thank you, New York Times, mouthpiece of the CIA. So at that point, the Russian goals were to force neutrality in Ukraine, scare them enough and force neutrality, and stop any invasion and destruction of the Donbass. Which, by the way, as documents that were captured later showed, the plans wasn't for the Ukrainian army to stop at exterminating the Donbass, as they talked about quite a bit, but they were planning on attacking into Rostov and into Belgrade, Rostov and into Voronezh, which are inside of Russia, Russia proper. So they were going to try to bring the war to Russia to cause a political crisis with the hope that the government would collapse, and then they just start chopping up Russia into pieces. Not just them, but the rest of the of NATO. Their wet dream, their wet pipe dream. It didn't happen, obviously. The negotiations. Zelensky was scared enough. Negotiations were almost concluded, and then we know that that Biden via his proxy, Boris Johnson, who got $1 million for that little trip, which also came out. They scuttled those negotiations, and we got the war that we got. Well, the next set of goals that changed after that, because the goals mutate. As more blood is spilled, as more treasure is spent, the goals mutate. Russia was occupying Zaporozhye and Kherson, which are all ethnically Russian areas, with a large percentage, by the way, of Greeks, who were also second-class citizens in Nazi Ukraine, and Serbs too, because these are areas that under the Tsars, Greeks and Serbs were allowed to colonize, because there are a lot of empty land, and colonize in their effort to get away from Turkish rule. So the people there said, well, you want us to cooperate with you. We're not going to cooperate with you because when you leave, we're all going to be massacred, just like people were massacred in Kiev Oblast and Kharkov Oblast when the Russian military left those areas. and the secret police, the SBU, came in, and there were videos that were coming out of just bodies being rolled down into pits, women, men, different age groups, arms tied behind their backs, already dead, obviously. Well, at that point, Russia had to make a choice, and they made the choice of, okay, well, we're not going to leave them. We're going to protect the people here. And then those people voted to join Russia. So now the goals have changed further. And they kept offering, look, the further this goes, the worse the peace is going to be for Ukraine. You had the best outcome back in 14. They screwed the pooch on that. So they had a better choice in they had a slightly worse choice in 15, which was Minsk 2. They screwed the pooch on that. Now you're looking at, the wording in that the Russian media now uses, and it has been using for the last year for territories outside these the 4, well, 5 if you count Crimea territories. I'm talking in the territories inside of Sumy, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk provinces. They're no longer talking about occupied areas while the fight is going on. They're now liberated areas. So that tells you those areas the Russian military isn't leaving. And the further this goes, the bigger those territories become. The goals change. The goals grow because the cost grows. What's the end result? I don't know. Worst case scenario is a war with Europe. With the non-Russian 2/3 of Europe. We own a third of Europe. That's something the Europeans don't like to remember. We own the best third of Europe, by the way, with the most resources and everything else. This is why Russia has no interest in invading Europe. I mean, Europe, the EU, the USSR. There's no reason. Russia right now is fighting over its historic homelands. Those are Ukraine is a evil concoction of Lenin, whose statues they keep pulling down. They should be kissing his ass. He created Ukraine. From Novorossiya, New Russia, and Malorussia, Little Russia. And then they added on additional territories, like in the west and some in the south. And Crimea back in 54, 55, somewhere around there. 56. Anyways, so those areas, I mean, it's an artificial country to begin with, which we're dealing with right now to the point. So these areas that we're fighting over, these are historical Russian lands. Russia has no interest in invading Europe. It has no claims on Europe. It doesn't want Europe. In fact, most Russians want nothing to do with Europe at this point. The European mask came off. Russians saw the level of actual hatred for Russians that was being splashed around in 22, 23, still is to some degree. And pretty much most Russians turned their backs on Europe. And all these European companies that think they're just going to walk in, once this is over, we'll just go back to business as usual. No, gentlemen, it won't. A lot of niches have been closed, and people just have a very bad taste in their mouth to do anything with Europe at this point. No, we don't want to invade Europe. Europe's got nothing. First of all, Europe has nothing Russia needs. It is a degenerate culture in most of Europe, except the Austro-Hungarians. The former Austro-Hungarians seem to be on track. Most of Europe has gone into an absolute degeneracy on the level of those Epstein files, by the way, because almost most of the European elites are tied in with Epstein. Big surprise there. It's post-Christian. It hates God for the most part. I mean, just look at, and all these people are like, oh, we still worship God, but it's just our elites. What are you doing to combat your elites? Nothing. Then you agree with them. Silence is acquisition to their demands and their desires. Europe, economically, Europe is a destroyed zone. Second world quickly collapsing toward third world. Infrastructurally, it's crumbling. There's nothing in Europe Russia would even need. No resources, no infrastructure, nothing. And additionally, there's no desire. Nobody in Russia wants to rule over most of Europe or any of Europe. Now, if the Germans start World War III again, and we have to take Berlin for the 4th time, we're going to keep Berlin. So the Project Germany will close forever. Let's not forget, Germany as a unified entity is less than 100 years. Always it was divided between up to 20 governments in that area. It was a land. It wasn't a unified country. But other than that, if the Europeans just stick to their side, well, Russia's not going to go in. It doesn't want to go in. But the fear of Russia is the only thing unifying the Europeans at the moment.
That was a great analysis, Davaslan. I was just, I was just thinking, um, before we finish up, one last question. As we all know, the Epstein files have come out, and the absolute truth that has come out of the Epstein files is very mind-blowing. I mean, people are not surprised, but it actually is mind-blowing for a lot of people. As you, who looked at a lot of the Epstein files, what would you say are your biggest takeaways from the Epstein files, and how much of and the files that really, the ones that you saw, from the file, the bits from the files really got to you the most? And as you mentioned before the show, you were talking about how, America could be close to a civil war and Trump could get a third term. Do you feel like this Epstein file thing is just accelerating? And also, do you think the Epstein file thing is accelerating the collapse of America? Go.
Well, first of all, before we go into the disgusting portions, which is the vast majority of it, but Epstein, it's very interesting who Epstein really was. Because officially, his background is murky at best. He was some kind of financial manager that suddenly got jumped, all of a sudden becomes this billionaire, hobnobbing with the rich and the famous. But when you start looking at it, he was a lot more than just a pimp for the rich or an Israeli asset, even though the London Times and now I think the New York Times have picked up are trying to blame it all on Russia, and that the victims of this is how disgusting these pocket monkey Western journals are, and they're quite literally pocket monkeys. They have no brains of their own, or they're corrupted absolutely. They do whatever they're told. They have no morality other than getting their paycheck. As Mark Twain wrote, journalists get paid to say nice words about very bad men, and the Western media is absolutely that for the most part. This man was everywhere. They're trying to blame Epstein as a Soviet/Russian agent, and that his 13, 14, 12-year-old victims were Russian honeypots from all over the world. This is a very pathetic attempt by and this started yesterday. At least that's the first articles I saw on this, starting from the Times of London. The Epstein himself, from these messages, was everywhere. He brokered deals for Israel with Mongolia, with the Ivory Coast, with Morocco. He was involved directly with various dealings with European politicians. He was working with with him and Bill Gates, by the way. We're working with the Russian non-systemic opposition. What that means is people are just trying to overthrow the government, not win elections, but overthrow the government. Ilya Pomonarov, who's a former member of parliament in Russia, who was an extreme liberal, LGBTQ and all that, and a Russia phobe. He was in that Yeltsin era type personality, who went on a trip to the U.S. and just stayed in the U.S. basically because there were criminal charges against them being formed for various corruptions and working with special services of various countries. So he stayed in the U.S. and attended various meetings on overthrowing the Russian government and breaking up Russia. And by the way, he's now a Ukrainian politician. The U.S. loves to move its little assets around from country to country like that. So Epstein was everywhere. And the more these files come out, it's the more amazing. This guy was a one-man show. He was everywhere with everybody. This guy seemed to be the main non-official diplomat for Israel, and not only. So who was this man? It becomes harder and harder to understand the more files come out. And then you get to the ritual murders and everything else. Look, what did the Justice Department say when these 3 million files were released? We did not release the files and images of dead bodies, torture, murder, other vile crimes, possible cannibalism. They didn't say they didn't exist. They said they didn't put them in there to spare the public. And because some of these are on open FBI cases, which actually means absolutely nothing. I can do an open FBI case, put a bunch of documents sealed under FBI case, and just leave it open for the next 100 years. Welcome to reality. But the fact that they said they didn't say these didn't exist, they said they didn't put them out. So they do exist. And just the things that were already described. Like, for example, one of those emails Epstein was writing, I don't remember who he was writing to. He said, I haven't heard from you in a while. How are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And by the way, I love the torture video. And things like that.
I know.
And just tons of this stuff. It tells you this. The Western elites are so far gone, and I'm not saying everybody, but the vast majority of them are so far gone, they're irredeemable. These people are absolutely evil. These people don't care about anything and anybody but maybe their very own and the power they hold. And by their very own, they don't mean the peasants under them. They mean themselves and their clique. And that they lie all the time, that's obvious enough. Look at Lutkin. I met him once. Me and my wife came in his house. He was just a disgusting human being. We left. I said, I'll never be around him. And then you go through the emails where he's writing. This is with the Commerce Secretary in the U.S. where he's writing to Epstein. Yeah, we'll meet you at the boat. With this other family on your boat, and they've got 4 kids, and we're bringing some kids. They're not on the menu. Like read between. He doesn't say anything illegal. There's not anything illegal. It's immoral because he's already lied that he wasn't he didn't have any other contact with Epstein. Obviously, he did quite a bit. But the hint or the nudge at, they're not on the menu, already starts to set this kind of aura, I guess you could say. But I mean, these people, they're just past disgusting. They are satanic. And if anybody had any questions, I mean, their groupies will still be their groupies. The hardcore MAGA that has ignored everything that Trump has gone against MAGA and done, they're still going to be Trump's hardcore groupies. But you look at a lot of the stuff that these people do, I mean, they're not redeemable. And societies have to make that choice. Are they going to keep that as their representative elite? If you believe in God, then you got to know the wrath of God is coming to your country. Because that's the man, there's a Russian saying, народ получает государство, которое они заслужили. The people get the government that they deserve. Well, those people need to start looking in the mirror and thinking about it. What have they done to deserve these elites? Or what have they not done that has caused them to deserve these elites?
That is a very good way to put it, And especially in the Epstein files, how it mentions about Rothschild and all of that, it's like revealed. Also, Stanislav, when I was also another thing about the files with how big it's been, you were mentioning right before the show, talking about like how Trump you think is going to run for a 3rd term and how it's going to lead to a civil war and the ICE thing. How do you see that happening? Can you see it getting to that point? And also,
there was a rally. There's been a
and Stanislav, and also, if there is going to be a second American Civil War, what do you think it will be? Do you think it will be regional or state versus state? Go. Sorry about the interruption. Go.
No problem. There was a rally, and I've got the video on my phone, where Madeline Addison was there, and she admits that they gave Trump $250 million, her and her late husband. And Trump talks about how, her husband, I don't remember his name, was really a great guy. He really loved Israel. You come over here and talk about Israel with me, Israel. This is an American citizen whose first priority isn't the U.S. But what's new? I mean, how many members of Congress have dual citizenship with Israel? There was one member of the Senate after October 7th. He was running around for like 2 or 3 months in his Israeli army uniform. I mean, you know, you cannot have members of parliament and people in top government that have dual citizenship with any other country. If you're running a country, you have to have loyalty to that country and that people, the people that put you in power, or the people that you represent. It's like having a king that has that's also citizen of a couple other countries. Well, is he your king, or is he just a representative of some other country? You know, where's his loyalty? You want your leadership's loyalty to be to you, and only to you. When people like DeSantis, who said to Tucker Carlson, "Now I wanted to be the best senator to represent Israel in the U.S. Senate." No, I didn't want to be the best senator to represent Texas that elected me. No, I want to be the best representative to be for Israel. Holy crap! You know, that's insane. They're just when you hear things like that, it's absolutely friggin' insane. But that's what you're seeing a lot of this. And she came out, you know, the U.S. after Roosevelt had 3+ terms. So he got elected on the 4th term. He just didn't live to see the end of it. After that, the U.S. put an amendment that blocked more than 2 terms. Before that, there was no block on there were no term limits for presidents. Well, and in this rally, they're talking about, yeah, we've got lawyers working on getting our way around. And she's like, yeah, and I'll give you another $250 million, maybe more. And then the crowd starts cheering 4 more years, 4 more years. So obviously, you know, there is an intention. And this was this year or last year. I'm sorry. So obviously there is an intention to grab onto power. Now, these ICE cases, I see that as manufactured crisis. Look, most people in America want the illegals out. Even most of the liberals want the illegals out. You know, we've got illegals in Russia. I want them out. It's normal for people to want illegal people out of their country. You want to immigrate, you immigrate legally or don't immigrate at all. And almost anybody with any kind of rational mindset anywhere in the world is going to have the same thing, because humanity on its very core is a clan-based system. We just upscaled our clan a lot further. I mean, it was clan, tribal, and so on. Originally, family units, hunting family units. The gathering was when you couldn't bring any meat. There's a good. This will probably bring some laughter to some people and some flames on me from others. The Americans have this good joke. What does vegetarian mean in Comanche? Bad hunter. You know, so that's there's that kind of joke, but that's just the reality of it. I mean, people don't want illegals in. So if you're going to get rid of illegals, what do? Do you put these half-trained, if even barely trained, half of them are, I think, are former mall security into with a uniform, an automatic rifle, and then you watch some of their tactics that they go through. They're obviously absolutely untrained people. Just the way they move, just the way they bunch up, the way they act, but they have a very wide breadth of do as you wish. You put these people, where would you send them to get rid of a large quantity of illegals? Do you send them on the streets to go after onesies and twosies, somebody's house, or go to some school, grab the janitor out of that school, and so on, while making tons of mistakes and beating up American citizens, grabbing American citizens, and so on, because these guys are ignorant? Or do you send them to big construction sites? You send them to meat packing plants. You send them to various manufacturing facilities where there is a large number of illegals. You obviously go for the big prizes. You go for the meatpacking plant, or maybe there's 200 illegals working there, and grab them all up at once and go, hey. But by the way, those are owned by the donor class, so that's not very good, because the donors get pissed off. But if you send them in the city, look, this is assassination by proxy. You send a bunch of these idiots that are half trained, fully cocked, with assault rifles, and basically carte blanche to do as they wish. into a city, they will cause incidents. They will kill people. This last guy that they're making a hardcore mag is making excuses for, he was a radical, not radical. Look, he had a right to carry a firearm. Let's begin with that. Under American law, he had a right to carry a firearm. He was a nurse, so he wasn't someone sitting around on his arse in the basement like some of these American, some of these pro-Trump videos are coming out. He was a nurse. He came there. They pepper sprayed and pushed down a woman. He went to help her. He got pepper sprayed in the face. They had him disarmed. He disarmed. He was on his knees getting back up, and he was shot 5 or 6 times in the back. And videos are there. I mean, everybody's videotaping. Everybody's got a phone these days. It's a new thing. Same thing with a woman that was shot 3 times in the head. And what the interesting video, if you watch the whole video of the shooting, whether it was justified or not justified, if a police officer shoots a person and that police officer's life is not in imminent danger, that's a crime scene. Until he's proven not guilty and justifiable, that's a crime scene. You get the local police, the police would send a crime investigation unit. They called off that area. The police officer hands over his pistol to ballistics to trace the rounds, because every rifled pistol has a separate fingerprint, or every rifled barrel leaves an individual fingerprint on that bullet. He does a testimony, he writes a statement and so on in an investigation. What did we see when that woman Good, Rebecca Good, I think, was her name, got shot? The ICE agents got in a car and drove away.
Renee Good,
yeah. They got in a car and just drove away. This is a total disregard for law and order. We do as we wish. But when you do that, obviously you're going to get kickback from that. You get blowback, and you get the crowds, are more radicalized. And all of a sudden, and this isn't just in Minnesota. Minnesota is just the key area right now. And then Trump starts talking about Sedition Act. See, the federal government in the U.S., there's a policy called Posse Comitatus. Post-Civil War, the U.S. federal government cannot bring in federal soldiers into state property without the permission of the state government. Federal soldiers have to stay. So even if you take the National Guard and you federalize them, then you got to get them off whatever state property unless the governor allows it. But the only way you bring them in, the exception to that is sedition. Which, by the way, interesting enough, who signed the Sedition Act in America? Thomas Jefferson, the very person who was committing sedition against the king. So he was one of the key revolutionaries committing sedition, but when he became president, he signed the Sedition Act, which forbids sedition. So, your morality, or not your in general, but morality of a lot of people is very flexible, all depending where what chair their arse is filling at the moment. But the fact is, once you get the Sedition Act, you give the president broad emergency powers, maybe broad enough to put aside a election next year that he's going to lose, or this year that he's going to lose. The Republicans are going to lose badly. It's a lot of possibilities, but no matter what you look at it, the U.S. is a post-republic. The U.S. Congress is not even toothless. It's toothless, spineless, and legless, and probably brainless at this point. If you look at Rome was still calling itself a republic long after it was a dictatorial rule. Long after that. Sure, they still had a Senate. A bunch of rich guys got together, chopped up the budget, took a bunch of money home, had their little orgies, and rubber stamped whatever was before rubber was even brought to the New World. They were rubber stamping whatever decree that the emperor wanted. But they still called themselves a republic for another 200 years. The U.S. is at that point. The only difference is it's still got elected presidents as opposed to emperors. That could change too.
Stanislav, I think that, there's a lot of people like conspiracy theorists because how they're gonna, collapse America and how they're planning to replace America with Israel as the next globalist power, like Pax Judaica, and how Pax Americana is going to die, like especially once the dollar collapses. A lot of people on my Twitter, there's a guy called Good Free, and also I have a good friend of Heidi. She goes on the spaces, and he's been taught. I'm not friends of Heidi. I'm sorry. I am friends of Heidi. I was not meant to say Heidi, but I was meant to say I am friends. I'm not friends of Good Free, but he is on the same circle with my friend Heidi, and he is mentioning about how he reckons that the Minnesota crisis will lead to some kind of BLM on steroids, a BLM on steroids event, which will bring in martial law. And as I think the martial law event, however it starts, could be the thing that leads to the Civil War. I think that's what's going to happen. I think whether it's state or regional, who knows? It's just who knows what's going to happen from that. But I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
It could, and civil wars mutate too, like any war. It could start. The UK is basically in a civil war right now. On the one side, you have the Islamists who are well armed already. On the other side, in Mao's stages of revolution, they're already in stage 2 out of 3 stages. The Islamists are organized, they're organized Shari police, and they're armed. The nationalists are arming up. The IRA just reappeared. That kind of went under the radar. The IRA made a statement: we're here to fight the immigrants with our British brothers. This is how much things are mutating. They are rearming and they're reorganizing. So you've got two sides, basically. And the thing is and then you've got the government that's trying to clamp it down and turn the UK into an open-air gulag. I know you may not be able to say all this or video what I'm saying out being in the UK. Limited freedom of speech. But you've got this situation where you've got a civil war could start with small bands fighting it out in the cities, basically like the Troubles. The Troubles is a prime example of a civil war on a low scale, but they tend to mutate. Ireland, Northern Ireland is a very limited area, so you're not going to see field armies, just because of population densities and territory size. But what starts in the US with something like that could very quickly mutate into something much bigger, into a regionalized. Believe you me, I serve these people in the South. Outside of the big cities, a lot of Southerners consider themselves occupied territory. They consider the South to be occupied by the Yanks. And they know where their great-great-grandfathers fought and died, and wonder what generals. And you'll see quite a few Confederate flags out in the countryside and in the small towns. The bigger cities have a lot of liberals in there, either Southern liberals or a lot of economic refugees from the North, where they destroyed their own economies, like in states like in New York, and then flooded down into North Carolina, into South Carolina, those areas. It's the same thing as when Californians run into Texas. They don't change. It doesn't break into their heads why their states are bankrupt and corrupted. They just go. I always call them economic locusts. They've eaten through everything in their own state, and they're running to the next state to consume that. Because they don't change as people. They're the same. They follow the same stupid liberalism that destroyed their own state, and they just export it on with themselves to the next state. For the vast majority of them, anyways. So what starts with a small clashes can quite literally grow quite quickly, or it might just simmer as small clashes for dozens of years. It's hard to say. These things, they take on a life of their own. So it all depends. Very much so, all depends.
Well, it was an honor to have you, Stanislav. Where can people find you?
A bunch of places these days. On Telegram, I have 2 channels. The Russian language channel is Stas Tudaya Obratno. The English language channel is Stas Was There. I'm at I am on YouTube at Mr. Slavic Man, Slavic with a K. On X, it's Stanislav Krapivnik, not Stas Krapivnik. That's a backup site. And I opened a Substack. I've only got about 3 articles in there right now, but it's growing. The Substack is Zmei Garinich.
Well, thank you, Stanislav. It was an honor to have you. And make sure, everyone, you go follow him on Twitter. Go and support his work. Yeah, go give him all the support he needs. He's very good, very awesome at what he does. Yeah, thank you for having. It was a pleasure to have you on. And yeah, and thank you for everyone for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 174. Remember to like and subscribe and to share this video to your friends and family. Take care, everyone. God bless you all. Stay safe and